Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the EU Spectator, the podcast where we dive deep into the latest issue shaping European Union today. I'm your host, Catalin Gabriel Done, and joining me as always, it's our friend and co-host, Nick Zalewski. In this episode, we will trying to tackling a particularly pressing and controversial topic, migrant crime in the UK and Nordics, and from rising crime rates to heated political debates, this issue is falling public discourse across Europe. We'll unpack the facts, examine the narratives, and discuss the politics that are at the heart of this debate. So whether you are turning in to get informed, challenge your perspective, or simply keep up with the latest, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Nick, thank you very much for your presence in our podcast.
Thank you for having me, for now having me as a co-host. And everyone, make sure you remember to subscribe to the channel. Go ahead, give the video a thumbs up, and go ahead and comment whether you agree or disagree with us. So if you agree with us this episode, put some emoji that has the color green in it. If you don't, then put emoji with the color red. And then also real quick, besides this, and besides talk about European Union politics, if you haven't had your fill of politics, I'm going to be starting my own YouTube channel and filming a video, different videos about with the channel entitled Saving the American Dream. And it's going to be still talking somewhat about politics, more just focusing on what needs to happen in the US to maintain and keep on improving the quality of life and achieving that American dream that people really enjoy. So the first video will be included in the description of this video.
Yeah, of course, and I should say that I'm the first subscriber to your channel, and I'm waiting for your first video. So, Nick, as you know, Europe has long been a destination for migrants seeking safety, better economic opportunities, and a fresh start. But however, in recent years, concerns about migrant-related crime have been a heated topic across the continent, especially in the countries like the United Kingdom, the Nordic nations, and why not Germany and the Netherlands. These concerns are often magnified by media reports and political rhetoric, populist rhetoric, which sometimes blur the lines between facts, myths, and fears. The impact of migration on crime rates, it's a complex and sensitive issue that requires careful examination of data, policy responses, and I don't know, societal implication. It's a subject that touches on security, immigration, and the very fabric of multicultural societies. On the other hand, in the United Kingdom, discussions around migrant crime have intensified, particularly following Brexit, where immigration control became a central issue for the British government, while some argue that crime rates involving migrants have been sensationalized. Other highlight specific instances that have fueled public fear and anxiety. The UK's approach to immigration and crime and crime control has been under scrutiny, especially as the government seeks to balance the social government seeks to balance the need for labor migration with public safety concern. And similarly, in Scandinavian countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, debates around migrant crime are not just about statistics, but also about national identity, social cohesion, and the challenges of integrating newcomers into traditionally homogeneous societies. As we explore this topic, it's crucial to differentiate between perception and reality, and to understand the broader context that drives these narratives. Are migrants more likely to commit crimes, or are they being scapegoated for broader societal issues?
Unfortunately, based off of the data that's available in various countries, because part of the issue too is that some nations don't necessarily want to broadcast this data, so it's hard to always know. But basically, from the available data we have, it absolutely, unfortunately, is a major issue. Now, what becomes a tricky suspect and what enables mainstream media that is very left wing to pretend migrant crime isn't an issue is when you have extremist parties. Even I know we're focusing more on Northern Europe and the UK, but just an example, Vox from Spain is
Okay.
that unfortunately, so for example, migrants are responsible on average for 30% of the crime, despite being 15% of the population. The issue with Vox, which gave mainstream media the opportunity to say, oh, it's not as bad as they're saying, is that Vox was trying to flip it and say, oh, 70% of crime is because of migrants, which you see then in mainstream media. Well, that's not the truth. But then the issue is media then refuses to discuss the truth and say, okay, yeah, that's not the truth, but migrants are still responsible for much more crime than they should be. That they're bringing problems with them. This isn't the solution that everyone's pretending it is, because I don't know if for people who don't necessarily use X, which is formerly known as Twitter, as much, you have these nutcases on the far left in Britain basically pretending that every single immigrant in the UK is a medical worker, that they were saved by a migrant. So they are showing surgical SARS and stuff. And it's like, look, absolutely, there's migrants who are helping societies by bringing different skills, but that's not the case for every single migrant. And part of the issue is what the UK and other European countries are facing is that there is a clear line between legal migrants and the illegal immigrants, because the legal migrants are the ones adding value to these societies, the ones who are following the rules, paying hundreds of euros every year in order to meet the various requirements in order to be a migrant. I know myself, I'm being an immigrant in Italy, and this I definitely, since starting this PhD, definitely agree that if anyone hates illegal immigration, it's nobody more than us legal immigrants, because we know the requirements that we go through, the hoops that we jump through in order to stay here legally, only for others to exploit it, not follow the rules, and then nothing happens to them.
Okay.
And that's the issue that we're definitely seeing is that, and it was interesting because there was even a newspaper article discussing this in Italy, which discussed that there is a major discrepancy between crime amongst legal immigrants in Italy and illegal immigrants. And that's part of the issue that we're seeing in recently in Germany, that it's coming out that a lot of these criminal suspects in various cases, including the most recent stabbing spree, which murdered 3 people, is that, oh, well, they had tried to seek asylum, but then they didn't qualify, and then they never left. And this is the big issue with European countries, is that you cannot allow people to stay. You need to deport them if they do not qualify for asylum status. And that's also the thing that nations should be putting data about, because it would be interesting to see that, because when you do this, it then puts a bad name for other asylum seekers who do qualify, who aren't committing these crimes, who are trying to integrate into these societies. And that's the issue, that we've now hit the breaking point that you're seeing so many Europeans say, enough's enough, I don't want any immigrants, if our nations aren't going to handle it properly, and they're not. And we're definitely seeing the two-tier system justice that's occurring, because what European nation would allow a citizen to break the law for 9 years without punishment? And that's what we're seeing, for example, in the UK,
Okay.
where a Pakistani citizen was part of a grooming game, which as we can't necessarily go into due to the YouTube algorithm and them censoring free speech, which Google what those groups do. He was supposed to leave the UK 9 years ago. Nothing happens to him, but now you have British citizens already in prison, basically for, and here's the issue that you definitely do have some citizens who took it too far, who are advocating violence against migrants, which you're not going to be allowed because that's not necessarily free speech. You're advocating for criminal acts.
Yeah, but
You can't just say
in this
whatever.
case,
But then the issue is that we have immigrants like that, just a garbage human being helped all these crimes happen against children, still doesn't get deported after 9 years, but then you'll have people being put in prison because, oh, they shouted at a police dog? Are we serious? And this is where people are pointing out that now we're definitely seeing two-tier justice, that Europeans and legal immigrants have to follow the legislation, but if you have no papers, you do not qualify for asylum, well, you could do whatever you want because the police don't want to deal with you. And that
yeah,
can't be,
and I
because we've
think,
hit the breaking point that political parties such as AfD in Germany,
okay,
they're going to continue to surge because people are going to say enough's enough. And even though these political parties could be a bit too extreme, because mainstream parties refuse to deal with the handling migration correctly by deporting people who have no visa, have no citizenship, do not qualify for asylum, just allow them to stay in the country, commit all these crimes, because and it's sometimes hard to find this data because at first I was trying to see, well, okay, how many annual stabbings, for example, does Germany have every
mhm.
year? And doesn't necessarily throw out a number when you do on Google. And I know it's not necessarily 100% accurate always, but Wikipedia was showing of all the stabbing sprees that happened in 2020, only one was by a German citizen. The others were by the first listed was by Somali. The others are by Syrians, Afghanis, and the
Right.
only one even that was done by a German, they admitted, was the only instance of a mass stabbing that didn't result in any. It's because the German state failed their citizens and legal immigrants then of saying, no, we're not going to allow people who are dangerous to stay within the country. And if you look, several of them, even if they did immigrate with permission, they then had different criminal records that their permissions to stay in Germany should have been revoked. If you cause bodily harm to other people, why are you allowed to stay as an immigrant in that country? The first, you shouldn't be given, sorry, but the minute you do something physical against another person, okay, you're gone. Go back home. If you want to be violent, then go back.
I totally agree with you, but I think that in this point we should be a little bit more technical when we talk about legal and illegal immigration, and because legal and illegal immigration represents two, I really think, represents two fundamentally different paths that
Yeah,
individuals take when moving to another country in Scandinavia, Germany, UK, wherever, but. There are I think more distinct legal, social, and economic implications, because the legal immigration occurs when individuals enter in a country through official recognized channels, such
yes.
as work visas, student visas, ASU, family reunification, or refugees and asylum programs, and these immigrants completely with comply with
Yes.
the distinctions country's immigration law, undergo background checks, and often have to meet certain criteria such as proving employment, financial stability, or humanitarian need. On the other hand, illegal immigration involves entering or residing in a country without official authorization, often by crossing borders without proper documentation, or overstaying a visa. And
Right,
international
where
law
they could have attained a visa simply for tourism and then they decide to stay, where that was
exactly.
how they then immigrate without actual permission, which is dangerous because um he, it's not necessarily as deep of a background check for someone simply coming on vacation where it's like, well, okay, do we likely think that they'll return home? Do they have enough money to stay during that temporary time where they won't become a burden if they're only coming here for, 90 days maximum?
Right.
Okay, then they could come rather than, okay, does this person have no criminal history where we could allow them to officially immigrate to this country? And
Hmm.
that was the interesting thing. And I'll just refer to Italy because I saw the lengthy news article talking about this, and they pointed out that most of the time when people are illegally immigrating to Italy, it's
Hmm.
because they don't meet the requirements, where they have a criminal history or something that would prevent them from
Right.
immigrating legally.
Right.
But the
And
problem too is that one, and the UK, and part of the issue is the Tories did not make enough progress on almost anything, which is why they lost the election to Keir Starmer. But oh my gosh, the UK screwed itself over so much with electing him. The fact that here you have a housing crisis for citizens, legal immigrants who've been there for years.
mhm.
And now, but what he's worried about is, oh, well, we have to also worry about the people who'll be arriving in the next years with building up housing. No, focus on your own population. Why are you possibly focusing on? It's almost like he wants to encourage more asylum seekers who are until they actually establish themselves, it could be years that they are a net drain on public resources where they're contributing nothing to your society. You're having to subsidize them while we keep on talking about how we have all these financial crises in these nations already help in order to pay the bills that we already have
Right.
and paying out to pensions in order to help people maintain the quality of life they've been enjoying. There's no focus on that. It's all about, well, we have to help this, or we have no
I,
enough.
I agree, but at the beginning of our discussion, you mentioned the media, and I'd like to ask you, what role do you think media play in shaping public perception of migrant crime in these countries? Like,
Because they're
from
lying to
your
the
point of view?
public. Not the fact that they will occasionally admit, because it's really entertaining that right now there's been a lot of discussion about Danish and Swedish gangs. And nobody's talking about the uncomfortable reality is that a lot of crime in both nations is from immigrants. Immigrants
Yeah.
are 60% of crime suspects in Sweden
I-
are foreign born in Sweden. So
right, and
that's three
I
times the
can confirm.
population, but the media will sit there and say, oh, well, Swedish gangs. Really? How many of them are citizens? How many of them even have a legal permission to be in Sweden? Or even if they do have legal permission, if
It
you're carrying out
depends.
these horrific crimes, no, you don't get this legal permission. You're gone. You can't
Yeah,
become a gang member in Sweden and decrease the quality of life for other, because that was the thing. This isn't just impacting Swedish citizens, it's impacting other people who have the legal right to stay, such as this one uh I'm trying to think. It was a very young where you could tell she has a foreign background based off of her name. Something Saad was her last Saad is her last name. She was a
yeah,
kindergarten teacher. Well, she
yeah,
was murdered in a bombing in Sweden
right,
because Sweden has, in case people don't realize, a huge issue with gangs bombing each other,
right.
which makes sense because this is a tactic
Yeah, this is true. And the state of security in Scandinavia, because I
back from some of
I
these Middle
feel,
Eastern countries, find appropriate to then do in Sweden, but then you're harming immigrants who came to Sweden to get away with that. And here now they're being killed in Sweden when the whole point of them moving was to be safer.
yeah,
Sweden failed that poor kindergarten teacher. She was 24 years old when she died.
I know, and I should recognize that the state of security in Scandinavia, particularly concerning migrant crime, has become a prominent issue in recent years. And despite being known of their low crime rates and high levels of social trust, countries like Sweden, as you mentioned, Denmark or Norway, have have experienced shifts in public perception due to reports of migrant related crime. And in Sweden in particular has been in the spotlight, with media often highlighting gang violence and crime in neighborhoods, as you mentioned, with high migrant neighborhoods with high migrant populations. And while it's important to note that the overall crime rate in Scandinavia remains lower than in many other parts of Europe, the focus on specific incidents had led to growing concerns about.
Well, it depends because now Sweden's getting up there, where Sweden's definitely in the upper third, if not upper 25% of countries, where it's one of the more dangerous for homicides rates in Europe. You know, FYI, Italy had the third lowest in Europe in 2022, and Sweden was up. And interesting enough, Sweden and Denmark, Luxembourg, three of the wealthier EU member states,
Yeah.
they were all up there, where they were top 15, the top 15 countries for higher homicide rates. So it's like, okay, wealthy nations, and yet you're having these issues. And part of it too, though, is that the media and these idiotic people are almost, well, that's because they're not able to afford to live in the wealthier neighborhoods. It's like, excuse you?
No,
Why
of
do
course.
we think that a first generation immigrant should be able to automatically afford to live in the wealthiest neighborhood in Stockholm when you have the overwhelming majority of Swedish people who've been there for hundreds of years and their families have never been able to afford to live in the most luxurious neighborhoods?
Right,
You
but
have this we have this warped expectation of what people should be able to afford and the quality of life when their own citizens don't even have that quality of life. And
right, but I should mention
you
that.
know, and part of the issue too, which people don't necessarily real. Hmm?
Sorry, I should mention that in response to those challenges you mentioned, Scandinavian countries have implemented a range of legal measures aimed at addressing crime, particularly in areas with high migrant populations. And for example, Sweden has introduced more penalties for gang-related activities, increasing police presence in vulnerable neighborhoods, and enhance surveillance measures. In Denmark, another example, in Denmark, recent laws have targeted so-called ghetto areas, introducing stricter rules for residents, including mandatory integration programs and harsher penalties for crimes committed in these zones. In Norway, we have also a particular legislation focusing on deporting non-citizens convicted of serious crimes and increasing funding for law enforcement and crime prevention initiatives. And in this light, what are your thoughts on these recent legal measures in Scandinavia? Do you think they strike the right balance between ensuring security and protecting the rights of migrant communities?
Well, the harsh reality, whether people like it or not, when you're an immigrant to a country, it does make sense that you have less rights than citizens. And I definitely feel that Denmark has the right attitude to this, which in case people don't necessarily realize, because
Me
this
too.
isn't necessarily talked about, is that even though Denmark is pretty darn harsh on requirements for immigrants to become a citizen, or also with the fact that they don't want to tolerate crime, Denmark is led by a left-wing government, and that's what people don't, which I find interesting almost, that
Yeah.
because it's, which I almost find it's more or less a name only sometimes. The fact that these are the Social Democrats in Denmark leading the nation, and yet they have more right wing policies on migration and crime. But because it's a left wing party label, the media almost gives it a pass. Where if AFD were to say this, if Maloney in Italy were to say this, extremism, we cannot let them gain power. And
This
it's
is
like,
not
really?
about extremism. I'm so sorry. This is not about extremism. It's about
No,
security
exactly.
and
It's
social
about what's
safety.
right to protect your citizens. And
Right.
for what people don't necessarily realize is that what I mentioned before with that kindergarten teacher,
In Sweden.
who died in the bombing in Sweden. Part of the issue too is that in case people don't necessarily realize, because I feel a lot of people don't know too much about Sweden, is the fact that a large percentage of residents live in apartment buildings. So when you're having these bombings target apartment buildings, it's not just targeting members of other gang members, it's targeting innocent families who are also living in that apartment building who then are losing their homes because they're getting caught in a gang battle that they didn't choose to participate in. And that's so it's like, no, we need more European countries saying, okay, if you get caught in a gang related offense, you're gone. You are banned. And the EU, I advocate for a strict penalty that if you're convicted of harsh things, it shouldn't just be for that member state. If you're part of a criminal gang, you're banned from any 27 members, from all EU member states for life. You can never
Oh,
immigrate
yeah.
again then.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
enough's enough. How many citizens, how many legal immigrants have to die at the hands of criminals who Europe doesn't have to tolerate? And part of the issue that I have with the left is I'll see different left-leaning Italians saying, oh, well, we have the mafia in Italy. It's like, so because you have to fight the mafia in Italy for your residents, you're then going to tolerate immigrant criminals because, well, there's also no. The whole reality is that because all of our countries have enough criminals who are citizens who we can't just casually deport, that doesn't mean that we should allow immigrants to also add to it, illegal immigrants to also add to the crime. And that's what we're
Right.
seeing, though, is that now it's getting worse. And even back in the United States, where people could tell that with different crime waves happening in different cities, with just the lawlessness happening in Chicago, a lot of it is illegal Venezuelan immigrants who they weren't this, but then people and the media try to paint the picture of, oh, all immigration is great. Uh, it helps contribute to our societies. It's like, oh yeah, legal immigrants could definitely help contribute to our societies, but let's not pretend it's every single immigrant. Let's not pretend that we don't have an issue with illegal immigration because we are. And it's kind of sad that you're seeing governments sometimes, especially Ireland. Ireland's become a lost cause too, that it's almost just shoving it down the citizens' throat, saying, "Well, you're going to deal with this or not." And it's also disgusting though because you're seeing, and in case people don't realize, Germany has the second lowest rate of home ownership in Europe,
Yeah.
which, hey, people, guess what? This becomes an issue when you're retired
Right.
because whether you like it or not, rent prices go up. So Germany actually has a higher homeless rate than average, almost on par with Greece, which, as we both know, Greece has suffered economically significantly. Germany in no way should have a similar homeless rate to Greece, and yet that's the reality. But
Yeah.
sorry,
And
German citizens who helped rebuild the country after World War II. All you people who, wait, hold on, I need to finish this. All you
yeah.
people who helped, all you citizens who helped rebuild the country, sorry, you have to choose between food or housing because we need a house. And that's where I have the issue too, even with the asylum seekers, where countries like Germany need to cap it
Mhm.
because if you're not raising pension benefits for your citizens who worked hard for 30, 40 years to contribute to the country to help rebuild it after this horrific war, that yes, Germany was at fault, but okay, they still had to rebuild the country. How the heck could you look at these citizens in the face, 70 to 80 years old, who probably physically do not have the ability to work and say, sorry, we have to help the asylum seekers. We have to help illegal immigrants instead. You who, this is the only country that you have the legal rights to, full legal rights to. No, we're not going to take care of you. No, we're not going to raise your pension to keep up with the cost of living crisis. Because, and this is the issue because these countries are feeding into it by not building enough housing.
Right.
elderly Germans who cannot afford rent, it's because Germany keeps on saying, well, we need immigrants for the economy to fill jobs. But they're not talking about the reality that there isn't enough housing supply to job vacancies with immigrants. Then they're screwing over their own elderly pensioners because then they can't afford rent anymore because you keep on having a high demand, which, whether you like it or not, someone who's working could, even if they have to work extra hours a week to afford rent, you still have that ability. But when you're 80s old, who's going to hire you even? You
Yeah,
hear it
you're
all
right.
the time about people who are desperate because they're in their 50s, so they only have about a decade before retirement, and it's already hard for them to find a job. So who's really going to go out there and say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to hire the 80-year-old"?
Yeah, and I'd like to add something because you mentioned Greece. uh, we should recognize that the influx of migrants and refugees into Greece has significantly impacted the country's social security landscape,
Yeah.
straining an already a fragile system. We recognize this, and
Well, I gotta be.
overcrowded refugee. Yeah, but overcrowded refugee camps and
I
limited
gotta give credit
resources.
though to be say so because Greece, Italy, etc., and that's why a lot of immigrants then try to not stay in Greece or Italy is because it's no secret you're not entitled to many benefits in Italy or Greece. So what do? They try to go to countries like Sweden or Germany who overlook their own citizens in need to then give it to people, even if they didn't enter the European Union in the most correct legal way.
Right.
And
And
that's
in
the
this
issue.
case, yeah, but in this case, public services such as healthcare, education, and social welfare are under increased pressure, particularly in the regions near key entry points in Greece and Italy. And the EU should recognize this and should act to protect Greece and Italy.
Well, and that's why I gotta think Hungary. I think Hungary is going to finally raise awareness because I don't know if you heard, because Hungary doesn't want to take in alleged asylum seekers, and I say that because there's no guarantee they um, qualify. Because, by the
Yeah,
way, I'm pretty sure we mentioned this in a previous podcast. In
yeah.
Sweden, when there was a study showed that 79% of asylum recipients went on vacation to the country they're seeking asylum from. You're not an asylum seeker then. You were able to fake the system, but if you're returning to a country that you're saying is so dangerous you have to flee, you're not a true asylum seeker if then you're returning on vacation. And
Yeah.
this is why I fully 100% agree with the US law that if you enter the US seeking asylum, you cannot return to that country, vacation or otherwise, for 10 years, which makes sense because it's almost the US's way of accepting that, hey, situations in countries do change, so you shouldn't be banned for life from returning to that country because it could easily become safe for them. But at the same time, if you're trying to take advantage, well, not take a benefit from taxpayers helping sustain you until you get on your own feet in that country, you shouldn't then be returning to that country then on a visit, which is what's happening. And that's something that, but anyways, also with Hungary, because it doesn't want to accept that, the European Union said it was going to fine Hungary 200 million euros. So
Mhm.
I loved Hungary's Viktor Orban's response, which I don't agree with him on a lot of things, such as with Ukraine. But
Of
however, I
course.
absolutely do agree with him taking the steps, such as Governor Abbott, the Texas governor, of busing migrants to places that support it. So Chicago, oh, we'll pay everything. Okay, so Governor Abbott started busing them to Chicago, New York City. Viktor Orban, he's going to bus them to Brussels. And I say absolutely. If the European Union Parliament wants to demonize
Mhm.
Viktor Orban for not taking many, for not taking enough migrants in, okay, bus them to Brussels because apparently Brussels wants more. And
Okay.
this is when you're going to start seeing political pressure being put on the European Union to say enough's enough, unfortunately, because when that happened in Chicago, for years, people would say, these southern states talking about the border wall, they're racist bigots. But then when cities like Chicago, New York, Colorado, Denver started having to pay and start helping support the migrants that they said for years, oh, we're a sanctuary city, we'll help everybody. Once they actually started having to balance their budget, pay these costs, all of a sudden you have all these voters in Chicago, New York City crying and screaming, build the wall, build the wall. Same thing's going to happen in Brussels if you're going to have all of a sudden a huge flux at the steps of the European Union institution steps.
Yeah, but
Because this is the harsh reality that there's not enough money. And that's the issue that we definitely do see with larger countries where they'll try to say, oh, well, just 1% here. Well, you
right.
need that 1% of your budget for elsewhere.
Right, and I'm not a big fan of Orban Victor, but
No.
Hungary has consistently refused to participate in the in EU relocation scams designed to
Well, part of it is
share the
which
yeah,
Hungary isn't which Hungary doesn't deny is the fact that Hungary still has a lower GDP per capita than the European Union median GDP per
right.
capita.
But on
And
the
this is
other,
the main focus where Viktor Orban is almost saying, well, wait a minute. We have all these Hungarians in poverty. The country still isn't as strong economically as member states like Germany. So why should we be paying for
I agree with
foreigners,
you.
particularly if they didn't enter the European Union the right way? And the other thing that people don't necessarily want to talk about is that when you have some of these asylum seekers, they pass through numerous different countries because they wanted to reach a European country, these other countries where, so for example, different ones who pass through Africa, sub-Saharan, they come from sub-Saharan Africa and go to Europe. They pass
Okay,
through 10 different countries. But the harsh reality is they pass through countries that would allow them to stay, but wouldn't pay them to pay for rent and stuff. They'd be on their own.
right,
They
but
prefer to come to Europe where, oh yeah, well, we'll at least pay for you for 2 to 3 years.
right, I agree with you, but at the same time, I think that I should share the critics within the EU that accuse Hungary and Viktor Orban of fostering a climate of fear and xenophobia using anti-immigration rhetoric as a political tool to really domestic support. And the
But
European
the harsh
Council,
reality is, which sometimes he does it to a degree too much, but then the harsh reality is true because you see that largely Hungary and Poland, who have resisted this reallocation, which member
right,
states are safer in the European Union? Poland and Hungary. It's not Sweden. It's not Netherlands. It's not
right, but
Belgium. It's not.
Nick, but we are part of the EU, and the EU has also condemned Hungary and Poland too for their refuse to uphold decision made collectively by the EU member states, such as mandatory quotas for relocating asylum seekers from frontline states like Greece and Italy. And this is a big problem because if a country like Hungary will refuse to be part of a collective of a collective decision, that means our union will not work anymore.
I know, but I got. It's a BS decision. It should have never been made. It should have been the fact that no, these countries simply cannot afford it. And European Union has definitely got itself in a big mess of trying to say, oh, we won't say no to anybody. Okay, but the issue is the number of people, citizens in these European Union countries is starting to dwindle while the population in struggling nations worldwide only continues to climb. The harsh
Yeah, but
reality is that European Union taxpayers cannot save everybody in the world. And that's almost this collective decision where, well, we
right,
just have to reallocate them uh, to try to, it's like, well, no. And what it should be more of the thing is the European Union has to look into changing it and looking at and stating a rule that they're not going to take in asylum seekers who pass through
right.
other countries that they could have claimed asylum. And that's the issue that the European Union currently faces. So I'm sorry, but I
Right.
almost do agree with Poland and Hungary breaking this collective rule because you're
But
having countries like Germany, one of the wealthier ones, and they cannot keep up with it financially. And yet they
right.
want to force Poland and Hungary into this misery as well.
But we have also I should recognize the violation of EU asylum laws and human rights standards, because both Hungary and Poland have been condemned for their failure to comply with EU asylum laws and international human rights standards. Hungary, for example, Hungary's construction of border fence, pushback practices, and criminalization of aid to asylum seekers have been viewed as direct violation of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, and also I think the
Yes, and what about the human
1951
rights of all the
Refugee
European
Convention.
Union citizens and all the legal immigrants who have died at the hands of people who should have never been allowed into the European Union in the first place? And that's the
Right.
thing that we don't talk about, because looking at this past stabbing in Germany, three
Yeah,
people
but
dead forever, lost their lives. Now they have no human rights because these member states, such as Germany, are so slow with this asylum process that even when you have people receive, no, you can't stay, well, they don't even make them physically leave. And
yeah,
that's the
I
issue
agree
that,
with you. I agree. I totally agree with you.
but
And
that's the issue. The European Union never talks about the human rights of citizens when it comes to cases like
of
this. Instead
course,
of, they're always focused on people who aren't citizens, people who,
what I'm trying to say is that if we condemn Hungary and Poland, we should also condemn Germany, as you said,
yeah, but
because
the problem is we never do. We
yeah,
never do.
because and I have an argument for this, because all these actions undermine the core values of the EU, which emphasize the protection of human dignity, a fair asylum process. We don't have one in Germany, and the right to seek refuge from persecution. And where's the solidarity in the EU?
There is no solidarity. And part of the issue is because if you look at it, where if when looking at a map about whether people identify with the European Union, with their region, so such a for example, looking at you. So, okay, looking at people from Bucharest level,
Okay,
who do they identify with? Do they identify with that region? Do they identify with the nation overall? The only region in Europe that actually identifies more with the European Union is Bucharest because
yeah,
they differ politically with Orban. That's basically it. All these other regions, they focus more on the regional or national identity. People love to try to say, oh, as citizens of the European Union, but at the same time, still, most people do not automatically identify with being a European Union citizen as their utmost important identity. It still falls more on their national or regional identity.
right.
And the fact that with how many where there's still restrictions. So, for example, we talk about all the time, oh, freedom of movement within the European Union. But the harsh reality, which so many European Union citizens don't even realize, is that European Union citizens have to still present themselves to the immigration offices in
I
other
have two
member states
examples.
if they plan to stay for more than 90 days to
Yeah,
show that they will not become a financial burden. So,
I have two examples, and we discussed previously this topic. We have Romania and Bulgaria that are not allowed to be part of the Schengen area.
yeah,
Yeah, so
well, and okay, and then here's the funny thing. We want to talk about with Hungary having closed borders, but then for anyone who hasn't really paid much attention to Denmark and Sweden, what do they have to do? They have to close their borders because it's so dangerous with the gangs, where they don't want gangs going back and forth now,
yeah, but
committing
they have
crimes across the border
right, but
because
they
there's
have
been
no, they have some agreement with the European Commission.
no, you're but the issue is that they're still having to close they're having to tighten border controls more than in an ideal world they should be because they let this crisis get out of control.
Mhm.
And that's the thing that the European Union has to be strict in saying, hey, we'll allow immigration. The European Union should focus more on asylum of neighboring countries. So looking at the fact that, okay, what are the nations neighboring the European Union? Okay, Libya, Egypt, Turkey, etc. But if you're coming from Democratic Republic of the Congo, you pass through multiple countries where you could have potentially claimed asylum, but
Right.
you're trying to reach Europe in order to receive more financial assistance. And there really has to be a lot of discussion on the fact that yeah, when you're having European Union citizens making hard decisions such as, well, I don't earn enough in order to have children, but
Right.
then you're going to be paying all this money for people to come to the European Union.
Yeah.
And then also the harsh reality when you look at Sweden, taxpayers are paying for people with asylum status, but then they're going on vacation to the country they're allegedly seeking asylum from.
Hmm.
That just feels very gross and wrong. And
Right.
it's just become such a huge disaster that I hope Hungary does keep it up with busing migrants to Brussels, because if all these politicians in Brussels want to take this up, okay, then enjoy this. And part of the issue too is, which is interesting to me, which you tell me how it is in Romania, but looking at Italy, for example,
Hmm.
since this is where our PhD is based out of, it's bizarre that the constituency you represent, not only in European, looking even at just at national politics, it's very bizarre that you could be in the Chamber of Deputies representing a part of Italy that you've never lived in.
Right.
In the United States, this does not happen, which I agree. You should at least have to live a few years so you understand what's even happening in that region, because it's so bizarre to me to see different politicians representing regions that they've never been to. I mean, looking at Salvini and how much he just despised southern Italy for years. And then he represented Calabria at one point as a politician. Are you kidding me? He never lived in Calabria. What does he
Yeah.
know
You're right.
about what suits the needs of Calabria? And
Yeah.
this is the issue too with some of these European Union members of parliament. The fact that it's easy for them to condemn Poland or Hungary, but they've never even been to some of these neighborhoods facing increases in crime in their own in their own nations, where uh, it almost seems that these would be the type of politicians who would love to adopt some of the, for better almost for lack of a better term, woke language of just, oh, we need to consider our privilege, when accepting all these illegal immigrants into the European Union and then not deporting them because, oh, well, maybe they had a reason to do so. Okay,
Mhm.
and what about your own citizens who have to face the backlash, your own citizens who are then being killed because some of these immigrants who are entering illegally then decide to go on a stabbing spree?
Well, it seems that we need more than one episode to discuss
No,
this
exactly.
issue. And the
But
key,
it's because just to leave it, it's,
yeah,
this has become a mess and it's not going to improve anytime soon
of course. And
until mainstream parties, such as in Denmark, start to
mhm,
address it. And that's also the interesting thing, that the minute you have mainstream parties, such as the Social Democrats in Denmark, adopted it, you would not have some of
a
these
strong,
parties that people warn about, such as AFD. If you
right.
have if Schultz started talking, he started legal immigration in Germany, you would then see support for AFD, which people are nervous about because considering Germany's past. You would
Yeah,
start seeing support for AFD shrinking because they would realize, oh, well, our current prime minister's focus on it.
yeah.
No, we don't have to support AFD then.
Right. Actually, I think that the key takeaway is that addressing these concerns requires a balanced approach
Yes.
that acknowledges real security
Which
issues.
we're not seeing it balanced, which is why you're having politically extreme parties reaching new
Yeah,
heights of popularity that they haven't reached for decades. And
right.
it's only going to get worse until mainstream parties actually address it.
Yeah,
And the
unfortunately.
issue is we're not seeing them addressing it. So until they address it, well, okay, Vox, AFD, other parties such the Swedish Democrats, they're going to keep on surging in popularity in these polls until voters, the faith of voters and mainstream parties is restored because they're willing to find a balancing act of actually helping people in need, helping legitimate asylum seekers,
Yeah,
and deporting those who are not. But instead, when you have member states allow people to remain, close to a decade with no
yeah, yeah.
permission, this is when you're going to see popularity for AFD surge, which by no means is AFD necessarily the solution because it seems like they love screaming about things, but not necessarily coming up with a plan. But this is where mainstream parties have really pushed themselves into a corner.
Yeah, I promise you that we'll continue the debate on this issue. I really hope that this episode offer a clear picture of the current state of security in Europe and the various ways countries are responding. We'd love to hear to hear you, ladies and gentlemen, your and to hear your thoughts on today's discussion. So make sure to follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, and
Like the video and put a comment with your favorite EU member state flag emoji in the
yeah,
comments.
sure. And please don't forget to subscribe to the EU Spectator wherever you get your podcast, and stay tuned for more insights on the issues that matter most to Europe. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much, Nick, for your contribution, and I promise we'll continue our discussion on this topic.
Yeah, hopefully we have a good update.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.